All right. Hey, come back. Machine. What? No. And we are, oh, I'm back to recording. Good. Sorry. I was trying to tell it to record again, and I thought I had not. But let us turn our attention to Psalm chapter 51. Maybe I should more accurately say the 51st Psalm. And we just got the, did I tell you guys to read a bunch of it? I did tell you guys to read a bunch of it. All right. So as we you guys put your eyes on Psalm 51 and your ears on it now, as I will read it for us. There we go. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you only have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so you are proved right when you speak and justified when you judge. Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Here ends the reading as far as I wanted to take it just now. So as we have heard David's words of confession there in Psalm 51, when does David confess that he began being sinful, that he began sinning? My dear man Gerald, when did he start?
At birth.
At birth. When he was born?
So
that's the first part of that verse. What about the second part of verse 5? When he was conceived, right from the off. All right. We've spent some time on when does conception actually happen, and we have a disagreement with those who would say it waits until the implantation of the new baby in the uterus, the conception rather being that moment when egg and sperm meet and form an embryo, also known as zygote. So I wanted to get to that answer. Gerald, I feel like you had a follow-up comment. I wondered if you did, as you were saying, as you were getting to. I wanted to hear from you when David confessed that he began being sinful, and it just sounded like when you had stated that, you then had something else you wanted to add on to it.
Some of them now are saying not until you're a couple days later.
Right. Yeah. There are some theological traditions, I'm looking your ways, Baptists, that would hold on to the idea of an age of innocence. Up to a certain point, a person is not guilty of their sins, which doesn't jive with what David writes here in the 51st Psalm. Yeah.
Heard indications of that because I talked with someone who actually came up to me and said, "So you're going through seminary, right? Y'all believe that was the church that original sin and he's going through the Bible and stuff like that." I think he was going through something and said about Solomon, but I brought up this passage, and his defense of that was that indicates that David's mother conceived him while she was ritualistically impure or something like that.
Oh, all right.
But there's no proof of that.
Yeah, that strikes me as quite a step off from the context. When David is, he himself had written down, or the people who titled up the Psalms had written down, the occasion for Psalm 51 here is after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. So that we are introduced to these first 5 verses, and we could have kept going a little bit more, but you'll notice it starts with this acknowledgement of sinfulness, and we just got as far as him then turning and saying, look, it's been this way the whole time I've been alive, from the time of my birth, from even the time of my conception. So just to try to press for that kind of context from Psalm 51, when Psalm 51 already has handed you the context that it's supposed to be read from.
I do think that is interesting, considering that David's son, who he's lamenting over, which was taken from him, was conceived in sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting.
So what does that child need that David is asking for? Which is another way of asking the question that I've highlighted for the good people on the screen here, but the next one there. So if David was sinful, if he began being sinful from the time he was conceived, then what does this indicate about the child in utero? What's that? What are we on? So, children in utero. What does David's confession of when he started sinning?
Well, you were sinful in the womb. But the next verse says, you desired faithfulness even in the womb. You taught me wisdom in that secret place.
Ooh.
So he was even teaching him in the womb. And he said, for the next verse, they're still in the womb and he's still learning.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a neat way to take on that one.
What version?
I was going to say, I thought I handed you a New International Version. What did I hand you? That's a New International Version. Wow. Yeah, okay, so this might be the new 2011. Yeah, this is the new 2011 NIV. All right, because the 74 NIV indicates the just inner parts and inmost place rather than womb.
Do you want
so that's but given the Hebrew to the whatnot. Now we're gonna get off of this in just a moment here, but
I can go grab my computer and look up Logos to see what it says.
We're good.
Okay.
We're good. We are, but we are acknowledging that when we pull things out of Hebrew into English, it can certainly go in more than one direction, and that translation keeps us right there in the womb. So now you've got the child learning in the womb. So what I'm wanting you guys to notice here is that children in utero are candidates for salvation, would be a way of putting it, in need of forgiveness, included in God's promise for forgiveness, for cleansing, that they are already at the time of conception, those who have had Jesus' blood spilled for their sake. That's quite a way to ponder on.
Yeah, at the time of conception, when the two cells come together, they weren't.
They came from sinful mom and dad, but they weren't ever going to be a person apart from that moment there.
Being united, they would never be a person.
Yeah. Okay. So now turning attention to the different contraceptive methods, back to Donna Harrison's article here in the 2020 January-April Concordia Theological Quarterly. She indicates, and we're going to get to them, I was going to have you list them, the 5 basic methods of conception, but instead I just kept noticing that I was like naming them as I was going through. So what we get from the 5 basic methods of conception, which we're going to go over, the first being the fertility awareness-based method, and that would be the second thing. Barrier methods, that'd be
contraception.
The contraception. Did I say conception?
Conception.
Yeah, my bad. They go right together.
5 different ways.
5 different ways of conception. No. 5 different ways of contraception. And as you look down the printout there, you see them listed. Fertility awareness, barrier, hormone-based methods, intrauterine methods, what do they call those? Yep, intrauterine devices, as well as finally emergency contraception. So those would be, we're going to go over each one of them, but what, again, is their goal? And I've got that in the question there, so I am going to answer my own question here. And that would be, they're not looking, what they're looking to do is stop a positive pregnancy test. That's what contraceptions are trying to do. They are trying to stop the production of HCG, which, having learned from a couple of weeks ago about how this stuff normally works, is like one of the last parts of a child being formed in the womb. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before that, and then finally HCG comes out. These contraception methods are just interested in whatever they can do to stop that HCG getting produced, because then you can stop a pregnancy test from saying you're pregnant. That should get us worried, knowing how much stuff has to happen before HCG gets produced. Human chorionic gonadotropin. Almost sure.
So to put it bluntly, you're still taking the life.
In a lot of cases, let's talk about this. So the 3 ways, here's the question I've got for you. The 3 ways that a contraception method can result in a negative pregnancy test is that it will either prevent the sperm and the egg meeting. So that's one way it can stop HCG. Go right back to sperm and egg meet, because HCG is never going to get produced if you can stop the sperm and egg meeting. So that's the first way. In the second way, it will make it hard for the embryo to survive. So the contraception could perhaps make it difficult for the embryo to get from the fallopian tube to the womb. It might make it hard for the embryo to implant in the womb. It might make it hard for the womb, for the uterine lining, to nourish the embryo. Any one of those things would make it hard for the embryo, for the child, the new, to survive. The third method is simply attack the embryo, kill the embryo. Many of the methods, many of the resources for contraception work in a combination of all 3. Not all of them work in a combination of all 3. So there we go. Those are the ways the contraception methods result in negative pregnancy tests.
So with the third of attacking the embryo, would that be before or after the implant? Because if it's implanted, according to the definition, that's a baby.
Right. Yeah.
Or that's a embryo.
So it's still, yeah.
They
would call it an embryo the whole time.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, it's not a pregnancy until, it's not conceived until it's implanted.
But for this, it could be attacking it
In the fallopian tube, in the womb, when it's attached. Yes, absolutely. That would be how you'd stop the HCG getting produced. Because again, the HCG doesn't normally go until the child's implanted. It's the thing that starts making the HCG. He or she is the thing that starts making the HCG. All right. A fertility awareness-based method for contraception is the awareness that an egg only has a day to get fertilized. So if mom and dad make a point that there be no sperm waiting for that in the fallopian tubes for that day, when an egg is able to be fertilized, when an egg is able to meet a sperm, there's your fertility awareness-based method. Just see to it that there's no sperm in the reproductive parts of a woman, so that when the ovary releases the egg, no foul. The egg will just go out, look around. No, nobody here. It's awful lonely. It'll be, you know, straight out of those westerns, tumbleweeds going by and all that. Yeah, yeah. Well, all right. Looks like it's time for me to hit the old dusty trail, and off the egg goes. And a child has never been formed. So this comes from the method where you pay attention to the things that happen during a woman's cycle, about all the things that happen in a woman's cycle, and pay attention to that. So that obviously it calls for a great amount of awareness of what are the exterior signs. There are many doctors who would be interested to teach a couple about, here are the different things that oftentimes indicate you're at this stage in your monthly cycle. So once you reach this point, then you know you need to abstain with one another unless you want to conceive a baby, and then wait until after you've met this stage. So hence fertility awareness. When are the eggs going to come out? Okay, that's how they work. And we don't have questions. The questions are not coming from you because you're uncomfortable about asking the things, because we're into the ooey gooey stuff of how women's bodies work. Right? No?
Been in that since
From the time we got here. All right, good. Barrier methods. Okay. So risk to the embryo, back to the, just briefly, risk to the embryo in the fertility awareness, none, because there's no embryo if it goes right. And then if an embryo is formed, the usual symphony of procreation would just get going. There would be no hindering of that. Okay. Barrier methods. There are a number of them. Okay. But what they're doing is they're just trying to put a barrier between the the sperm and the egg. Simple as that. So they are functioning in similar ways to the fertility awareness and just trying to keep an egg and a sperm from meeting and coming together. So of course, there are the reversible ones, and that would be a condom or a diaphragm or a cervical cap. These things all just provide a temporary physical barrier that seals the sperm off from entering into the fallopian tubes, or from getting, in the cases of diaphragms and cervical caps, just putting where the sperm can go, not is where the egg is going to end up. However, here's a note to say about the barrier methods. Many times they include spermicide, because sperm have been proven to be mighty swimmers, and they will power through a number of barriers or around. They're like good defensive linemen. They're going to get to that quarterback. They're going to get the job done. It's what they are there for. So many times spermicides are used in conjunction with the diaphragm, the condom, the cervical cap, what have you. All right. Once again, the risk to an embryo is none, because if an embryo is formed, nothing has been done to the woman's reproductive tract to make any difference. The symphony gets started. The first notes get played. All right. There have been past concerns about spermicides, that a spermicide would have succeeded in damaging a sperm cell. and the damaged sperm cell limps its way to the end of its job because it's going to get the job done. And it gets the job done, and a child is formed. Yeah, but it gets there. It's just, I mean, you know, again, those first notes of the symphony are just like, just big brass horns. It's glorious. But large studies have never been able to find an increase in birth defects in children born to parents who are using spermicides in their contraception. So as much as there was worry, hey, if we're hurting the sperm on their way through, isn't it possible then we'd be hurting a child of that sperm that makes it through? And studies have not been able to show that that is the case.
They're even stronger.
There you go. They wanted it bad.
Yeah.
All right. Now there are two, so we went with reversible barrier methods, condoms, diaphragm, cervical camps, because they're easy enough to undo. Permanent ones. There's the man permanent one and the woman permanent one. So a vasectomy for a man, it is a permanent male sterilization because it severs the vas deferens, and so where the sperm is made in the man is, and the place where the sperm is stored, the sperm can't get from the factory to the warehouse, and so they can't ever get shipped to delivery, to just press that analogy a little bit further. So once again, you're just keeping sperm from getting to egg, and since this is taking place inside the man, there's nothing that's gone on inside the woman. In the case of they call them tubal occlusion procedures. This is the other permanent barrier method, tubal occlusion. And this is when the fallopian tubes are closed in any number of different ways. So where the egg normally goes out of the ovary in order to meet the sperm, the entrance to that gets closed, so the sperm can't get in there. Sometimes part of the fallopian tube gets removed, sometimes burned, sometimes clips, sometimes an occlusive material is put inside of the tube. So the idea is to close off the fallopian and prevent sperm from getting in there to meet an egg. Now, here's where the problem lies. Occasionally, sperm are mighty swimmers. And they just get there. And then a tube that has been occluded has a hard time responding to the progesterone, which, you know, gently sweeps the embryo from the fallopian tube up into the womb, up into the uterus. An occluded fallopian tube has had trouble getting the egg out of the tube into the womb. So obviously these pregnancies don't often happen because there's a big, you know, brick wall in the way, but sperm, mighty swimmers. When they do happen, it is with the word frequent, that the embryo goes ahead and implants in the fallopian rather than in the uterus. And fallopian tube pregnancies, ectopic pregnancies, they are dangerous. Never mind how dangerous they are to the baby. Of course, a baby can't get all raised up inside a fallopian tube, but they also are very dangerous to mom. So in those instances, you got to end that pregnancy. That child has to get out of there because there's no surviving for the child, and it would possibly mean the death of the mother. There would be your young couple there. If ever you guys are going for a permanent barrier method, there would be your nudge toward the vasectomy, because the fallopian tube, as kind of easy as that is, for reasons of delivery, vasectomy would not pose the potential risk that a fallopian tube closing up would
What makes
pose.
the female body think that it's a good idea to do that? It has no other option. It has this thing it needs to protect, so we're gonna just give it all it needs, and it has nowhere
Yeah.
to go, so it must have made it.
Yeah, the sentence we got, and occasionally it happens in a, normally there's no reason to know it wouldn't go otherwise. But yeah, when an embryo is formed in a woman who has had this tubal sterilization procedure, the embryo often has that great difficulty traveling through the tube. So when the embryo is still in the tube, at the time when at the time when the embryo is ready to implant, then the implanting would happen in the tube. So it might be kind of an embryo thing. Right? Embryo would be like, I gotta bed down
Gotta
now.
stick somewhere.
I gotta stick somewhere.
Now,
Yeah.
what if, on the chance that happens normally, are there procedures to move the embryo
And get it up into the womb?
and get it up?
I've never heard of that. By then, damage has already been, by the time a mom knows, typically it's already too late. Like, damage has already been being done. Having suffered ectopic pregnancies, you don't know there's a problem until there's a problem. And by then it's either the body has already started the flushing to get it out, because the body's good at self-preservation like that, or it's hurting so much that the doctor then needs to go in and get it to where it's, not hurting anymore.
Is that a more common miscarriage, natural miscarriage?
Ectopic pregnancies, yeah, they pretty well always end in miscarriage. You're just really lucky when they don't end in harm to mom. All right. We did barrier methods. Now we get into the hormone-based methods, of which there are two categories. In the first place, there are artificial hormone contraceptives. So there's your first category, artificial hormone contraceptive. And your second category, are anti-hormone blockers. You could also just call them progesterone blockers. So artificial hormone or progesterone blocker. You could maybe be a little broader with that progesterone blocker and just call it anti-hormone, as I said earlier, but most of them block progesterone. All right, in an artificial hormone deal is you get a bunch of artificial hormones into a woman's circulatory system that interfere with the natural cycle. So where the natural cycle includes those follicle stimulating hormones, you would have enough hormones, artificial hormones in your bloodstream, so your brain would not produce those follicle stimulating hormones. You would have enough in your artificial hormones, so when you would normally have the LH surge, the luteinizing hormone surge, your body would be like, no, we got enough. We don't need to make any more. And so then there would not be an LH surge, those kinds of things. Whereas the blockers, the anti-hormones, really just include the abortion pill, just basically include abortion pills. And yeah, the paragraph here, not as clear as the artificial hormone paragraph, but those blockers include something called the abortion pill. And that would be, you kind of got to imagine it would suck up all the progesterone somehow. It would stop progesterone being produced. However that would go. All right. Oh. Here we go on to the next one. After having answered that there are artificial hormones and there are anti-hormone methods, how do any of these primarily work? They primarily work by interfering with the release of LH. This is how they primarily get the job done, to stop the luteinizing hormone getting made. As we have seen, this is the one that results in a lot of things turning their attention to making progesterone, that for pregnancy hormone. But if they can stop the LH surge from coming from the brain, then not much progesterone is going to be made. If they can make it so that there's very little of that LH made, then the ovary won't even release the egg. If they, if this were the case, if this was how hormone-based contraceptives always worked, just not releasing an egg, there would be it would be kind of right there with vasectomy. It'd be right there with fertility awareness. An egg and a sperm are never meeting. We don't got to worry. Unfortunately, we know for certain that women have gotten pregnant while taking hormonal contraception, so eggs are getting released. Even if reducing the LH surge, some cycles would result in the egg staying put. Other cycles, obviously, the egg gets out. But that LH surge was also responsible for the producing of progesterone, which then, if an embryo gets born into a fallopian tube, or an embryo gets formed in a fallopian tube, where you're not having enough progesterone being produced, then the fallopian tube's not going to sweep that embryo up into the uterus. The uterus is not going to get ready for and let that thing implant or nourish it, because there's not enough LH telling other parts of the woman's reproductive tract to do their jobs to make progesterone, and hence that embryo would get swept out as the body would finish its natural cycle, saying, oh, I guess we didn't make one this time. Better start over and try again. Obviously there, the harm is that the embryo that did get formed didn't get implanted.
But again, we don't know how often that occurs, because
Why don't we know how often that occurs?
nobody cares.
Because nobody cares. Because if we found out that happened X percent amount of time, we'd be like, oh, well then I guess we can't exactly say. But if all we care about is stopping a pregnancy test, good. But if we care a little bit more about the moment of conception, egg sperm meeting, then we're not good. All right. How else? Primarily, hormone methods work by cutting down the LH. How else do hormone methods work? This would be your blockers, your anti-hormones, your progesterone blockers. And they actively kill an embryo after implantation. As both the one cited here, RU486 and Ella, they attack the ruptured follicles. So when the egg had been in that follicle in the ovary and there was enough of an LH surge, it opened up and it let the egg go, and all that LH was working on that ruptured follicle, and it started to get transformed into progesterone producers, little progesterone factories. But RU486 and Ella, they go after that ruptured follicle and they break it down so that it can no longer make any progesterone. So it is very rare for an embryo to get implanted and nourished while RU486 and Ella are destroying the corpus luteum, the yellow bodies, which is the fancy name for those. Well, I've been calling them ruptured follicles. That's a fancy name for them. So the egg sacs where the eggs had been in the ovary.
So that one's very risky for the embryo.
That one is an embryo killer. Yep.
But
Yeah, because it doesn't do anything other than destroy ruptured egg sacs. So that's the only way it works. So
But a ruptured egg sac isn't necessarily fertilized.
a ruptured egg sac has not necessarily gotten that egg has not necessarily gotten to meet a sperm. So you're right. If the egg has not met a sperm and no embryo is formed, then the body doesn't. Then no harm is being done when those ruptured follicles are being destroyed
But it will attack an embryo.
by destroying those
Because it's
ruptured
looking for
follicles. No, it's destroying the egg sac that it had been in. And yes, so if the sperm and egg have met and made a child, then those egg sacs getting destroyed is going to be a huge deal. But if the egg never met a sperm, then it's no big deal that those egg sacs are getting obliterated. All right.
And the hormone, the artificial hormone contraceptive, we know that it's somewhat risky for the embryo, but we don't know how much.
Right, because sometimes it might prevent the release of an egg. And that would be cool. All right, eggs stay put in the ovary. But other times that egg gets out. And now it doesn't have enough LH. So it indirectly attacks those ruptured follicles. All righty. In a moment of levity, I will acknowledge to you that for whatever reason, I thought intrauterine devices, I mean, obviously the word uterus is in there. I see that. But it just, sorry, we're talking about, parts down there. I really don't know why. I just had it as part of the urinal tract in my head, and it just didn't, I mean, for the longest time, it made no sense as to what this was doing and how it was preventing pregnancies. So apologies for my own ignorance and taking a T out of the word, because that's how I ended up there. So an intrauterine device prevents and disrupts implantation. There you got it. It just hangs out inside the uterus, preventing or disrupting implantation. An embryo gets formed in the fallopian tube. There's not usually any kind of, well, I shouldn't say not usually. Let's see. There are some IUDs that are hormonal, and they would claim that not only does this device hang out inside the uterus, preventing or disrupting implantation, but it is a source of a hormone that would prevent, it is a hormonal preventing the egg being released. However, studies done in 1995 have indicated that even though for the first year of having this particular hormonal IUD in place, the follicular rupture rates, the egg sac being opened, are in a slight decrease. In following years, the egg release goes back up to normal rates of people of women who are on non-hormonal IUDs, or just those who do not have IUDs. So for 1 year with the hormonal IUD, you get fewer eggs being released, but then after that, it's a pretty normal amount of eggs being released. And the way this stops a pregnancy, gets your positive pregnancy test not to take place, is it's not letting that embryo implant in the womb. It's got no interest in stopping the forming of an embryo. It's only interested in, can I stop you implanting in the womb? How does it put it? Having that device in the uterus inflames the uterus. So they don't, they just aren't a place where the implanting can take place. There's too much swelling going on and the like.
That was sounds to me to be unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Not good. You don't like to have it? How's this? To improve the bleeding problem, because those inflamed wombs would bleed more easily, that's when IUD manufacturers started adding artificial hormones to their IUDs, hoping that there would be less of a lining in the uterus, less material to bleed out, so that it would not be bleeding constantly. Yeah. Intrauterine devices, putting a device in the uterus to stop the implantation of an embryo. Obviously, embryo is still being formed there. Okay. Emergency contraception. The 4 most common methods are your single dose progestins. That would be something called Plan B or Next Choice. The other common, and so with a single dose progestin, they resemble progesterone, but do not have all the actions of progesterone. So what they do resemble the natural progesterone, but they do not have all the actions of it, and are most effective if taken before an egg is released. So that would be, you have to kind of see it coming. And then, okay, if they do it before the egg is released, then they can help reduce the amount of progesterone being produced. Okay. Single dose progestins should be fake progesterone. The second one is the progesterone blockers, which we already spoke, RU486 and Ella. And they go after the ruptured egg sacs. The other common method of emergency conception is getting an IUD in place. Even if an embryo has already implanted, an IUD is capable of dislodging the embryo. All right. And then menstrual extraction.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's you get in there surgically and you remove the lining of the womb. So if your embryo is still in the fallopian tube, when it gets to the womb, it'll find nothing. If it's already implanted, well, then you just took it out. I should say he or she.
Was that line supposed to say contraceptive?
Yeah. That's it.
Emergency conception.
There we go. There we go. No problem. That is now
It's an
saved.
emergency. We need
That
a
is
baby.
now saved to drive. Well spotted. I left out the TRA. See, this is how I ended up with my confusion about intrauterine devices. I just leave T's out. All right, 4 common methods would be those single dose progestins, fake progesterone, would be the progesterone blockers that we previously heard about, would be having an IUD put in place, or it would be surgically removing the lining of the uterus, all of which we see either directly kill or cause a inability, or make it so that the embryo can't stay alive, can't get taken care of. So, which methods assuredly do not kill or harm embryos, zygotes, children, all words for the same thing? Family awareness-based methods, temporary barrier method, and male vasectomy. There's never been a instance in which these things have resulted in harm to the newly formed child.
But it would seem to me like, other than a vasectomy, most of this stuff is very harmful to the woman's body.
Artificial hormones cannot stop, in most cases, do not stop an egg meeting a sperm. And so what they're doing instead is making it difficult for the embryo to either get to the womb or stay in the womb.
So if this doesn't happen, then there are dead cells in the woman's body, and she has to reject them or get rid of them. Some way or another, absorb them or do something.
The usual cycle when a woman's body isn't pregnant, they'll take care of it, because the woman's body is going to the HCG, the thing that an implanted baby in a womb is going to produce, that's going to trigger mom to keep on growing. That's going to trigger the reproductive tract to keep on doing its job.
Now, if you have an emergency removal of uterine wall, can't the embryo still implant?
Yes,
So
which would be just as good as getting it out, because now it has to get out, because it can't grow in an ectopic pregnancy in a fallopian tube doesn't get carried to term.
And then you have another procedure to go.
Then you got a whole other thing to do. Unless you're quote unquote lucky and your body recognizes that needs to leave, and so then it flushes it out. But the uterine wall is designed to flush out. The fallopian tubes are not really designed to have that same action take place. So it's a nice lucky thing when an ectopic pregnancy breaks free of itself and is then discharged.
But wouldn't the main
Birthed.
the procedure find fallopian tubes that aren't in there? But wouldn't that mean that the egg, all those eggs get trapped and they are released trapped in the fallopian tube?
Hopefully you're not having too many eggs released in one go.
I mean, but over the years,
Well, at each cycle, the whole thing gets.
but how does it flush out of the fallopian tube if it's not connected? Because it goes through the fallopian tube.
Is this where your question was about the dead cells in the fallopian tube? That eggs that can't get out of there? This might be where it would have been handy for us to get the nice little drawing, the diagram of where the fallopian tube gets it from the womb and where it leads into the ovary or ovary, uterus. I said that backwards. All of that. So, all right.
I think that would be a problem. You get a bunch of rotting eggs in here.
You don't like rotten eggs.
They're pretty tiny.
They're super
Cells
tiny.
are-
They're super tiny.
cells are cells.
They're not big deal or big things.
But if
Yeah.
your body's used to flushing something out,
Mhm.
then it's not in there.
But it was a lot.
It is a single little cell. All righty. Thank you guys for the time. Sarah, good to see you again. Sorry the interwebs last week didn't work.
Oh, well.
All righty. Cheers, everyone.
All right. Bye.